So good morning. Just to note that with the continuing effort to rescue the hostages and to bring to justice those in Hamas that are terrorizing both the Jewish people and all the people who live in the land of Israel, because it's not only state for Jews. There are people who of all nationalities and all backgrounds in Israel, and indeed have been killed as a result of the terrorist attack. And then, of course, for the people in Gaza, as President Biden noted, the fact that Hamas is no friend of the Palestinians and is really keeping them hostage. And so, I hope that we have to give money to people who need assistance. There are people who are starving in Gaza, and those people need to be fed. And even the people of Iran, we care about the Jewish people cares about every single person. We don't want anybody to suffer. But sometimes it's difficult to get the resources to the people who are suffering, because the people who are in charge of the people who are suffering are taking all the money. And so as a result, it makes it a very difficult analysis of how to conduct business. So, in the prayer that those who are feeling oppressed should feel the sense of freedom. So we'll share these, words of learning Torah and the schus that we do this. The schus of our learning should again help us bring home safely the many captives that Hamas took that are still held hostage. Okay, so where are we? We are on Daf Ayin Bet Amud Bet. Near the bottom, third to last line, 72b, 72b4. We are going to have Rashi today. We're going to have. I don't think we're going to have any Tosfos. This is a lot of Agadita today, and so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and
the other rabbis.
So we're going to have a number of different rabbis that we're going to quote. We're going to quote Rava. We're going to quote Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. And here we're going to be talking about people who either were born from an improper relationship, or were and are referred to as a mamzer. That's a situation where two people who are prohibited to have relations and they have a child. Or then we're going to talk about a situation where we know who the mother is, but we don't know who the father is. That's a shituki. And then we're going to talk about a baby that's just found that is left left on the street, and that's an asufi, because they're gathered in. And the question is, in that situation, it's sort of even worse than a shituki, and because you don't know who either parent is. Now, we're going to see in the end that it makes a difference how the abandoned child is left. Because if the child is left abandoned in a manner that shows a sense of love and concern, then we're going to say that shows that it's just because we're going to basically say that it's presumably because of the dire straits of the parents that they weren't able to take care of the child, and not because of any improper behavior on their part. But let's go through it together now. So we're at the, again, bottom of Ayin Bet Amud Bet, third line up from the bottom of the page, last abbreviation on the line, Tan Rabbanan. Ger nose mamzeret, divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi tells us that actually a convert is able to marry a female mamzer. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ger lo yisa mamzeret. And Rabbi Yehuda says a ger is not allowed to marry a female convert. So echad ger echad eved mishuchrar v'chalo mutarim b'kohenes. On the other hand, and it's not completely clear whether this statement is a third statement that is not attributable to Rabbi Yehuda, or also should be attributed to Rabbi Yehuda, but then presumably Rabbi Yossi would agree to it. But in any event, a convert, a freed slave, and a halal, as a reminder, is a kohen who is the product of an illegal relationship. So if a kohen, if a father kohen marries a divorcee and they have a child, so the child is called a halal. And that means that he's not able to do certain kohen duties and should not get called up, I believe, for an aliyah as a kohen. I'm not 100% sure of that. Pretty sure that they don't duchen, and so as a result, they're not really a full-fledged kohen, but they are allowed to marry the daughter of a kohen, of kohenet. So my time at the Rabbi Yossi, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi? Why does Rabbi Yossi say that a mamzer, because we generally have an understanding that a mamzer is not allowed to marry anybody. So why are they allowed to marry a ger? So we're going to go through the psukim and understand that concept. So chamisha kahale ksive. It's the word kahal is written 5 different times, and Rashi helps us out because it's all in the psukim in Dvarim Perek Kaf Gimel. So if we take a look at Rashi, last Rashi on Ayin Betam Bet, Chamishi Kahale Ksive. So Gabi Azhara Psula Yuchsin, that when it comes to the invalidities and the improper relations in terms of parentage, what does the Torah say? One, it says Lo Yavo Mamzer B'Kal Hashem, that a mamzer can't come into the community of God. So that's Dvarim Kaf Gimel. Then it says Lo Yavo Lo B'Kahal, he can't come into the community. Lo Yavo Ammoni U'Moav B'Kahal, and then it says that an Ammoni and a Moavi can't go into the nation as well, and that's number 3. Then number 4, Lo Yavo Lahem B'Kal, and then you can't come into the Kal. And then number 5, Dor Shlishi Yavo Lahem B'Kal. Again, the 3rd generation of an Ammon or Moavi man, I'm sorry, of a Mitzri can come into the nation. Dimitri va'adomi, of a Mitzri and an Adamite. So that's I realized I should have continued that, and that's the end of that pasuk. So now, and then Rashi notes, well, one second, you might, because of your knowledge of Tanakh, realize that hey, there's another reference to kahal in those psukim in Dvarim Kaf Gimel, because it says the kahal the gabi pitzua daka, that when it comes to the reference to kahal in connection with somebody who has crushed testicles, because it says lo chashiv, that one isn't counted towards our number of 5, and that's why there aren't 6, because delabmin psula yuchsin kamishtai, because that one is not in connection with an issue with respect to parentage. So why do we have all 5? So now we turn to Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, and we say Chad la Kohanim. One time it mentions Kahal in order to tell you that a Kohen's not allowed to marry a mamzer. V'chad la Levim, and one time to tell you that a Levi's not allowed to marry a mamzer. And v'chad la Yisraelim, and one time to tell you Israel is not allowed to marry a mamzer. V'chad la Mishrei mamzer b'shatuki, and one's to say that a mamzer is allowed to marry a shatuki. So basically, a shatuki again is where we don't know who the father is, and so as a result, we're quiet. The child exactly about who their parent is. And one to allow a shtuki to marry anybody in Israel. So kal gerim lo ikri kal. So as a result, one category that we didn't mention, which is therefore is not considered a congregation, is not considered a kahal, is the group of converts. And so as a result, based on this, a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. Okay, so what about Rebbe Yehuda?
It sounds like a mamzer can marry pretty much anybody, or convert can convert can marry pretty much anybody.
Correct. That's exactly where we're going to end up, 100%. And we'll see an interesting story about Mechoza, which was a town that had a lot of converts, and their reaction to the teaching of this halacha. That's going to be a fun story that we will have later on today. So Rabbi Yehuda Kohanim Levim Mechad Kal Nafki. So Rabbi Yehuda. So how does Rabbi Yehuda handle this instance? How does he understand things that of course, because he says that a mamzer cannot marry a convert, a ger. So how does he include ger in the various categories? So he leaves one, he creates an additional kal, because he says that Kohanim and Leviim, which of course are all from the tribe of Levi, they are just a single kahal. And so I yater le kal gerim. And so as a result, the last kal is for the kal of converts. Of the ibayasemo, or alternatively, we can say a second potential answer as to how Rabbi Yehuda learns the prohibition of a mamzer marrying a convert. Hanami trei kahalininu. Really, those are two different congregations, meaning that the Levi and Kohanim do get their own references to kahal. But mamzer b'shtuki ushtuki b'Yisrael mechad kahal nafka. But we can learn the fact that a mamzer is allowed to marry a shtuki and a shtuki is allowed to marry a Yisrael. That we don't need two separate references to Kal to teach us that. We can learn it from something else, because what does it say? Lo yavo mamzer bekal Hashem, mamzer vadai hu de lo yavo, ha mamzer suffik yavo. That the idea is that a mamzer is not allowed to enter into the community of God. That is telling us that it's only an actual mamzer, and so as a result, a shituki is allowed, which is of course uncertain, because the issue isn't that we just don't know who the father is. And so as a result, it could have been a relationship that is not proper. And so as a result, that would be okay. And so that would be a problem. But we say, no, we're not going to deal with a suffix situation, and a suffix mamzer can marry into the congregation of Hashem. And so as a result, a shtuke is both allowed to marry a mamzer and is allowed to marry a non-mamzer. So b'kal vaday hu lo yavo, ha b'kal safek yavo. So and again, also a mamzer is not allowed to go into somebody who is definitely part of the congregation. But if it's just uncertainty whether they're part of this congregation because, for example, they're a shtuki, well, then you would be allowed to marry them. So that shows us how we can get from one kal both concepts of a mamzer being allowed to marry a shtuki and a shtuki being allowed to marry a Yisrael. The ibayasema, or alternatively, we can say, actually, no, even there we need to have two separate kals. That we also learn one kahal to tell us about a mamzer and a shtuki, and one kahal to tell us about a shtuki and a Yisrael. But the time of Rabbi Yehuda mehacha, and the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda that he says that a mamzer is prohibited is because of the following: because there's a kahal somewhere else in the Torah, namely hakal chuka achas lachem v'lager hagar. Though there should be that when it comes to the community, you should have one law that applies to everybody. Now that concept is not intended specifically in connection with this. It's in the middle of or at the end of Parsha Shlach, and so as a result, that's But the fact that you have another kahal, that gives us another kahal to use in order to teach us this law. Rabbi Yossi, why doesn't Rabbi Yossi use this concept of kahal that's in Parsha Shlach in order to tell us about a mamzer and a ger? Because that the wording of that pasuk does not have the concept of ger directly next to kahal. The fact that we have chukah achas in between tells us that we're not supposed to use that kahal to teach us about this concept of who can and cannot be part of the community. So, okay. So now the Gemara teaches us the halacha. So the Gemara teaches us the end of the brisa. So the brisa that we just quoted was echad ger ve'echad eved meshukra v'chalal mutar v'kohenes. We said that the last part of the it's the top of the screen, a convert, a freed slave, and a chalal all may marry a kohenet, meaning the daughter of a kohen. So what's the story there? Misayeya Rav, that brisa supports Rav, the Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, lo huzarab ksherus lehinase l'psulim, that when it came to female kosher kohanim, meaning kohan descendants, namely the women, they are allowed to marry even the people that are unfit for a kohen. So the daughters of kohanim can marry even these different categories: a convert, a freed slave, and a halal. And indeed, the Shulchan Aruch follows Rabbi Yossi, but I want to note that even though a ger would be allowed to marry a mamzer, it's not clear that they should, because the child will still be a mamzer. So it's important to note that. So Darish Rabbi Zera b'Mechuza. So we have the story. Rabbi Zera was teaching this law in Mechuza, ger muter b'mamzeret, that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer. Well, Rashi tells us here, rigamuhu kuli alma. We're going to see it's 1, 2, 3, fourth narrow line on Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Shahayu sham gerim harbe. There were a lot of converts there. So we're going to see. We'll finish that Rashi in a moment, because what happened? Rigamuhu kule alma be'asro gaihu. The entire audience, the entire world, they all started to throw not as stones, but esrogim at him. So so again, back into Rashi, v'hug shalahem, and it was difficult for them. Third line up in the narrow lines, sha'amar kal gerim lo ikri kal. That it was painful to hear that actually the community of converts is not considered a community. And so as a result, here you have a group of converts that are all living together in Mechuza, and they certainly feel like they should be entitled to be called a community. And so as a result, that was why they all were very upset with Rabbi Zera's teaching. Now, Amar Rabba said, Mi ika de darish milsa ki hai beduchta de yori. Is who can teach this law in a place that where there are so many converts? So as a result, Rava says, I'm going to do it. All right. So Darash Rava Mechuza. So Rava goes and teaches in Mechuza, and he does something very smart. He says, Ger mutter bekohenes. A convert is allowed to marry the daughter of a Kohen. And so as a result, everybody in Mechuza was so happy, because obviously that shows that the Gerim are full-fledged members of the Jewish community. So Tanuhu Bishirai. And so as a result, they would give them the leftover, cloths, so that they could, they were giving him nice clothing, or nice fabrics. So Hadar Darish Lahu. So then, of course, after having taught that and emphasized that, so then he says, Ger muter b'mamzeret. A convert can marry a mamzeret, a female mamzer. So Amrulay. So they all said to him, you're losing what you said. Well, you first had a great idea, and now you're undermining it. So Amrullah, he said to them, no, I'm going to do for you good. As I'm doing good for you. I'm doing, is what I'm doing for you. So you can marry, whoever you want. This was the point that Charlie was touching on before. In some ways, a convert is allowed to marry a broader array of people, and the number of people that he can't marry is more narrow. So the hilchos ger muter b'kohenet umuter b'mamzer, and the halacha is in fact that a ger can marry both a kohenet and even a mamzeret. So muter b'kohenet. That, as we said, that when it came to warning about a kosher Kohen marrying somebody that's unfit, that is only for a male Kohen, not for a female Kohen. So umuter b'mamzeret k'Rabbi Yossi, and it's permitted to marry a mamzer, just as Rabbi Yossi says. So
a question, I asked this before, and a couple of days ago. In a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, the halakha always follows Rabbi Yossi. It's even an explicit statement. Why does the Gemara actually has to say that explicitly for this?
That's a great question. Let's take so one possibility, I'm not sure. I'm sort of answering on the fly. Is the fact that we had three different sort of approaches to explain Rabbi Yehuda, and so maybe the fact that we had so many different ways to understand Rabbi Yehuda, and effectively that means three different arguments that Rabbi Yossi would have to reject. And so maybe that's the reason that you might have an extra emphasis here. I don't know that is for sure the case, but at least that's what occurs to me in the context of this phraseology. the other possibility is that no, I think that seems to me to be the most likely explanation because but I'm not but I don't have a sure thing in connection with that. I will, if Bli Neder, I will see if I can find something that might explain it. But I'll do a little checking, God willing. So stay tuned for tomorrow. Okay. So now we go back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah said that a shduki is somebody who is kol shemakir. They recognize who their mother is, but they don't know who their father is. So Amar Rava, Dvar Torah shtuki kasher. Really, according to the Torah, a shtuki could marry anybody. It's a full-fledged Jew that we wouldn't say anything to undermine their ability to marry. So my time, well, what's the reason? So the first proposal as to what the reason is maybe it's because Rov ksherim etzla umi psulin etzla the Uzli inu legaba called the farish meruva parish. That when it comes to who's allowed to marry her, right? So who could be the father? If we take a look at the entire world, there are relatively few people that she could have slept with that would result in the child being a mamzer. Whereas if the vast majority of people in the world, it would be a kosher situation. And so as a result, therefore, we need to say that in fact it's so therefore maybe we're just following the majority, because if in fact they the men all leave their place and go to the woman, so then when we take something out of the whole, if we have a bag and we take an item out of the bag and we put it to the side and we say, okay, what's the story? Is this item a good or not good? Well, then we take a look at how many good items and not good items are in the bag, and if the majority of the bag is good, then we'll say that the item that we pull out is good. So that's the concept of called the parish meruva parish, that anything that's taken away is considered part of the majority. But my amran, but the Gemara says 1 second, if that's true, Dilma Azla Ihila Gabayu, maybe she went to the man. And so as a result, Havale Kavua, the Kol Kavua Kamekta. Now, if we instead of looking at the one that we pull out, we instead focus on the bag itself. What are the outcomes? The outcomes are kosher or not kosher. And when we have things in their location, even when there's a majority of them in the location, we will say that we assume that it's a 50-50 split. And so as a result, your argument doesn't work. So therefore, Torah Amra lo yavo mamzer. So that therefore we're going to say no. The reason that we're going to say that a shduki from the Torah should be allowed to marry anybody is because we say the Torah says that a mamzer is not allowed to enter the congregation. Mamzer vaday hudalo yavo. Okay, ha mamzer suffik yavo. While a definitive mamzer is not allowed to enter, an uncertain mamzer, namely a shtuki, where we're unsure who the father is, would be allowed to enter. So bekal vaday hudalo yavo, ha bekal suffik yavo. But a mamzer cannot marry a somebody who's definitely part of the community, but he can marry somebody whose status is uncertain. So we see both that a shtuki can marry a mamzer and a shtuki can marry a Yisrael. So umatam amru shtuki puzzle. So well, then why do the rabbis say that a shtuki is unfit? So gzeira shema yisa achosoma aviv, because we're worried that maybe he will marry his father's daughter, namely his half sister, because we know who the mother is, but we don't know who the father is. Elamiata shtuki shtukim lo yisa. Well, in that case, why should a shtuki be able to marry a shtuki? Maybe the shtuki that he's marrying is also his half sister, because shema yisa achosomi aviv. Maybe he's his half sister. So kol kihane mazano va'azlei. No, because are we really going to say that somebody's going to have that many out of wedlock relationships that he's going to end up being the father of both people? That seems unlikely. But one second, if you're going to say that, well, what about the bashtukis lo yisa? How come a shtuki can marry the daughter of a shtuki? Because the daughter of a shtuki is just one. Is also the daughter of a shtuki is somebody else who got married to a shtuki. So the point is that that man who married the other shtuki, the two shtukis that got together, so maybe that's the father. Meaning, why are we only saying that we're worried about a man marrying his paternal sister when the person is a fully kosher person that the shtuki is marrying? Why not say the exact same thing when the shtuki is marrying some other shtuki? It doesn't make a difference who the person's marrying. We should be worried about it. Shema Yisa Achoso Me'aviv. Again, maybe he's marrying his father's sister, his father's daughter. So Elo Lo Shchicha. No, the whole thing is that it's not common. And Hachinami Shlochicha. And second, but if you're going to say that it's unlikely with respect to a shtuki, and that's why we're not worried by a shtuki, well, if it's unlikely by a regular Jew as well. So why can't we allow a shtuki to marry a regular Jew? Ella ma'ala asu b'yochsin. The answer is that no. When it comes to genealogy and ensuring the high standards of the Jewish people, so then as a result, when you have a shtuki, so then we're going to be worried about something that's even an uncommon situation, because we want to make sure that the lineage of full-fledged Jews is a valid lineage. And on the other hand, but when it comes to a shtuki where we already have an issue, so then we won't be worried about the lineage issue because we already know that there's a lineage issue. So it's not going to make the lineage issue any worse. So that's the approach with respect to shtuki. And so now we turn to the asufi category and we say, Amar Rabba Dvar Torah Asufi Kosher, that when it comes to an asufi, so then an asufi also should be, according to the Torah, allowed to marry anyone. And again, an asufi is a baby that is basically a foundling, a baby that is not, and we have no idea who either of the parents are. Well, my taima, Ashes Ish Bivalotola. Why do we say that really they should be fit? Because take a look. Let's think about it. If we're talking about a woman who had an affair and she became pregnant, so then she would say, why should she even tell anybody? She could just attribute the new baby, her pregnancy, to the affair. Exactly, that's fine. And so as a result, she doesn't need to throw away the baby, basically. So what other possibilities are there in order to create a problem? Well, miyut arusos umiyut shahal baalei and lemedina sayam. There's of course some people who are going to be married but not yet fully married. So they had relations when they were still only on some ways engaged. They had done Kiddushin but not Nisuim. Or maybe the husband went overseas and therefore the women have no ability to take care of the child. But there are also then who are unmarried and they also could abandon. The ikanami de machmas rabon. And then there are those who are going to abandon them because of starvation, even if they're fully married. So have a palga. So if you add all of these up, there's at least an even chance that there's no more than an even chance that it's an asufi is a mamzer. And so Torah Amro lo yavo mamzer bakal Hashem. And again, the Torah said that a mamzer can't go into the community of God. Mamzer vaday hu de lo yavo ha mamzer safek yavo. Again, this child who's a foundling, we have a lot of bases to say that maybe he's not a mamzer, and so as a result, will allow him to enter the community. So bakal vadehu de lo yavo habakal safek yavo. And again, a mamzer, this safek person, the asufi, he can both marry a mamzer and he can marry into the regular community. So if that's true, matam amru asufi puzzle. Why then do we say that a Sufi is not allowed to marry? Sorry for not scrolling. Why is we say that he's not allowed to marry another Asufi? Well, Shema Yisach Choso Miaviv. Maybe he's going to end up marrying his paternal sister. But Elamiata Asufi Asuf is lo Yisa. Shema Yisach Choso ben Ma'aviv ben Ma'imo. But then you have to be worried that maybe he's going to marry somebody else who he's not allowed to marry, whether it's his father's daughter or his mother's daughter, because he doesn't know who either parent is. That's going to be a problem also, even if he marries another Asufi. So Kalhani Shade of Azle. 1 second. Are we going to say that there's so many that are out there that are from the same parents or from either of the same parents? So Bas Asufi lo Yisa Shema Yisa Achoso. Well, 1 second. So then, all right, but still, you're going to have the same question that we had before. Fine, you want to let an Asufi marry a first generation Asufi because it's unlikely that they're from the same parents. But what about a second generation Asufi? You should still be worried. Shema Yisa Choso. Maybe he's marrying his sister. Ella lo shchiach. So bottom line, we say that it's not common. Hachanami lo shchiach. Well, then in that case, we should say with respect to a full-fledged Yisrael that it's not common. And so as a result, we should let an Asufi marry anybody. So as we answered previously with respect to the Shaduki, we answered now also with the Asufi. Elamala asu biyoksin. That when it comes to yichus, and especially one who has a valid yichus and a yichus that is unblemished, so then we are going to set a high standard for them, and we're going to say that they cannot even marry an Asufi. But when it comes to somebody who, when it comes to another Asufi, we will allow them to marry one another. So now let's delve into who, in fact, is an Asufi. So we're going to have a bunch of different categories, and this is very interesting stuff. Again, Amar Rava bar Rav Huna. So Rava says bar Rav Huna, Matza'o mahol. If you find the child, if the foundling, who we don't know who either of the parents is found to have already been circumcised, so ein bo mishum asufi. He's not considered an asufi, and Rashi tells us exactly why at the top of Ayin Gimel and Bet. De'i lav de kasher who, because if he wasn't in fact kasher, lo havatarcha be lemimayle. His parents wouldn't have been so careful to and taken the extra steps to circumcise him. And this is going to be the key concept. Did somebody show a sense of care to this child that would suggest that maybe we should say that the child is in fact not a mamzer and was well cared for, and it's bad situation that unfortunately there's nothing that the parents can do about it. So let's jump back in. Similarly, Mishalte Hadame, if his Rashi explains that they fixed his limbs and made them straight. You know, the idea is that when a baby is born, they're sort of having been in the womb, they're all tightened up, and so as a result, they exercise the limbs to get them going and straight, and so that the baby can grow nicely. So if we see that effort has been engaged in, also ein bo mishum asufi, he's not an asufi, because again, people are not going to engage in that effort if they are going to literally throw away the baby. So shayef mishcha, if he's been if he's been massaged with oil, is the way it's translated here. Umula kuchla, or he has, they put the eyeshadow on the baby, or rami chumre, or he's got, some kind of knots of herbs tied around him to show that they were concerned about his safety. Tale pitka, or he's got a written amulet, or tale kamiya, or they've got an amulet of spices. All of those ein bo mishum asufi. In each case, that's not going to be an asufi. And again, because all of these show a sense of care and concern. So totally bedikle, if the child is found hanging from a palm tree, well, then we have to ask question, because if an animal can reach it, well, then obviously the parents didn't really care about the child. Well, then so yesh bo mishum asufi, then he's be considered an asufi. Im lav ein bo mishum asufi. But if not, if they specifically chose a high branch so that the child would remain safe, again, the effort that was associated with that shows that the child was cared for. How about zradatat samicha lamasa? If he's found on a zradata tree, so then yesh bo mishum asufi. If it's near a city, then he's considered an asufi. Why? Because let's take a look at Rashi. Zradata desmicha lamasa. It's about 20 lines down, maybe 15, 18 lines down in the Rashi. Itali be'ilan sheshmo zradata. Shalreid belaz, that if you have this child and the child is hanging on this radita tree, if it's close to a city, even though it's hanging where an animal can't reach it, we still have to worry that there's an asufi, because the Amr ba'arvei psachim, because we said in Parak Arvei Psachim at the end of Maseches Psachim, Zradata desmicha lamasa, that when it comes to this tree, this Zradata tree that's close to a city, lo pechisa mishisin shide, that it always has a lot of demons that are hanging around that tree, and as a result, if parents are willing to put their child on a demon tree, well, then they probably don't really care about the child. Okay, so but im lav, if that tree, back into the Gemara, if the tree is not, in fact, in near a city, well, then ein bo mishum asufi. Then there would not be, with respect, any kind of a sufi concern. So now Beit Kanishta, we're 1, 2, 3, 7 lines down near the end of the line on Ayin Gimel on Bet. So when it comes to a Beit Knesset, if it's the baby is found in a Beit Knesset, well, then Smich de Lamasa, if it's in near the city, Ushchiche Beit Rabim, and people are usually found near it, well, then that means that the child is going to be found, and we don't have to worry about the child's safety because they were put in a safe place and in a place that's likely to be found. So then ein bo mishum asufi. Then that child is not an asufi. V'im lav yesh bo mishum asufi. So then they are an asufi. So Amar Ameimer, so now more guidelines in connection with whether somebody's in a Sufi. Ha Perid Sufle. Now, if you find the child in a pit, in a ditch used for date pits, well, then guess what? That sounds like a trash can. If you put your child in a trash can, then yesh bo mishum asufi. Then you should assume that child is in a Sufi. So charifta de nahara. How about if you put the child in some sort of safety basket floating in the middle of the river where all the boats are going? Well, ein bo mishum asufi, because they didn't have motor boats. So as a result, all the boats were going at a relatively slower speed, and they would see the boat, they would see the basket, and we knew that the basket would be found. This would be a high likely of being found and low likely of dying. So therefore, not considered an asufi. Exactly. Makes you think of
Moshe Rabbeinu.
Moshe. Exactly. So Pishrei. So what about if he's found at the very edges, where, as Rashi says, Pishrei. Now we're closer to the bottom of Rashi. So it's about 18 lines up from the bottom of Rashi in the narrow lines. Makom shiafua nar al yedei hafsharat shlagim. That as a result of the melting of snow, there's this additional water space on the river. She'ein derech sfinos la'avor sham. There is no likelihood of boats to come near there. And we're assuming, and people aren't going to be near there either. Well, in that case, yesh bo mishum asufi. Then, as a result, as we go back into the Gemara, yesh bo mishum asufi, because that would be a situation where the parents clearly didn't care that whether the child was found. So, how about if we change this to Rishus HaRabim? So it's interesting. We're going to actually flip things in Rishus HaRabim, because In Rishus Harabim, you have animals walking, and so as a result, Tzidei Rishus Harabim, if you're in the side of the Rishus Harabim, where people are still going to be found, so as a result, the baby is going to be found, but it's unlikely that animals are going to trample the baby. Ein bo mishum asufi. Well, then that's not going to be an asufi. But Rishus Harabim, you find this child in the middle of the Rishus Harabim, yesh bo mishum asufi. Then we say that there is a sufi, because again, we are concerned about that child's well-being. And the question is, do the parents shown concern for the welfare of the child? If concern is shown, then the child is not going to be an asufi. It's going to be considered a valid Jew. So Amarava, ubishnei ra'avon ein bo mishum asufi. And not only all of this, but in years of famine, it's also going to be considered that the child's not in a sufi. Now, the Gemara is going to challenge what on connection with what was Rava's statement made. Had Rava ahai. What was Rava talking about? Because Elaim Arushas Harabim, if you were going to tell me that he was talking about the last case that we just said, that when you put the baby in the middle of the public thoroughfare, that shows a lack of concern for the infant, and therefore we would say that he isn't a Sufi. And you're going to tell me now that if that were to happen in a year of famine, he would not be. Well, Aidi Dishnei Ravon Katlale, just because it's a year of famine, the parents are going to want to affirmatively kill the child? Of course not. That would never be the case, even in the year of famine. Meaning, if the parents actually care about the child, they would never still leave the child in the middle of the public thoroughfare where the child is likely to be killed. Ella atzide rishus harabim. So you want to say that it's talking about the side of the thoroughfare? Well, my area shnei ravon. I feel below shnei ravon. Why are you concerned about whether or not there's a famine? Even in years when there isn't a famine, if a child is left in the side of the rishus harabim where he's likely to be found and likely to stay safe, why shouldn't we say that the child is not an asufi? So elaki itmer de Rava ahad amar Rabbi Yehuda amar Rabbi Abba amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Zabdi amar Rav. So Rava made his statement in connection with the following statement that was said by Rabbi Yehuda in the name of a bunch of people that ended up being in the name of Rav. Kolzman shebashuk, all of the time that the child is found in the street of the imam imo ne'emanim alav. The parents can come at the last minute and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't want to do this. I don't want to leave you. We are the parents," and they will be believed. However, nesef minashuk, if the child has been taken out of the marketplace, ein ne'emanim alav, then it's too late. The child is considered an asufi. My timer, what's the reason? Amarava ho b'yatza alav shem asufi, because once he became known as an asufi, we're going to require more to get out of that category. But Amarava ubishnei ra'avon, that is only during years of famine. Aval pisha nesav minashuk of the imo ne'emanim alav. However, when it's in a year of famine, then even though the child has been taken from the marketplace, we are going to believe that this is their child. So the point is that although they are showing a lack of concern, if they actually come and admit it, then as a result we will say, okay, it's not because they didn't show a lack of concern, but because they came and tried to claim the baby. So we will allow that claim to take place, and we will understand that their initial failure was because they were feeling terrible because of the famine. Okay, so now Amar Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda says, so having touched on the testimony of parents regarding their child, we're going to talk about other testimony. And one of those cases is specifically the case that we just had, where the parents are the ones who are testifying. So there are three cases where we believe people immediately. Eluhain, Asufi, the case of an Asufi, namely the parents in connection with an Asufi, if they come immediately, i.e. before the child has been taken from the street, well, then they're going to be believed. Chaya, in connection with a midwife, upoteres chabroseha, and a woman who is exempting her her friends. And we'll see what those last two cases are about. So the Sufi case is the one that we just mentioned. So we don't need to go through the details. What's the Chaya case? What's the midwife case? The Tanya. Chaya ne'emanas lomar zeh yatsa rishon v'zeh yatsa sheni. A midwife is believed when she says this baby came out first and this baby came out second. B'medvar mamuri. When do we say that's the case? Shelo yatsa v'chazra. As long as she did not go out of the room and come back. About yatsa v'chazra. If she comes out and now she comes back and she has these two babies left before her, well, then ain't an emana. She's not going to be believed because it's hard to tell the difference between two babies. And maybe she doesn't know, and maybe she didn't get it right. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Huchsaka al omdan emanas. No, she's only believed as long as she's in her position. Being lav ain't an emanas. And then if not, she's not believed. Well, my benayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? If she turns away, even if she didn't leave the room, if she turned away, well, then Rabbi Eliezer would say that she's no longer believed, but the Tanakama would say that she has continued to be believed. And so as a result, but the bottom line is that in both these cases, it's clear that there is belief associated with immediacy. The question is just how immediate does it have to be? So that's the second case of immediacy showing a confirmation of testimony. The third case, Poteres Chavrosea Maihi. What's the case of a woman who exempts her her friends? So Ditnan, we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Nida. Shalosh Nashim Shahayu Yeshenos B'mita Achas. If three women were sleeping in one bed, V'nim Sadam Tachas Achas Mehen, and blood is found next to underneath one of them. And we're going to assume that people are in general restless sleepers. And so as a result, you cannot be sure that the blood is from any particular one of these women. Well, Budka Achas Mehen, if one of them examines herself, the Nimsis Tmeya, and she finds that in fact she is in her menstrual cycle, well, then we can say this blood came from her. He Tmeya, she is Tame, Vikulan Tahoros, and the other ones are considered tar, and we don't have to say that maybe this blood came from them, because if we did say that, well, then all of them would have to be treated as tame and would have to count shiva nikiyim, or at least go through some sort of process. Obviously, this was taught at the time. There's a Mishnah, so to be a slightly different process than we find at the end of the Gemara. But the bottom line is they would have to go through a tahara process. So and now we're going to say no. That in fact all the other women will be tahor if one of the women check herself and is bleeding. And Amar Rav Chisda, what Rav Chisda qualifies this by saying Shabadka Atzma Kshir says that the key is that she had to examine herself immediately. The point is that within a certain amount of time she needed to check herself, and only if she checked herself within that amount of time would we say that she is that the other two women are kosher. So all right, so we've now gotten the idea that there are situations where we will say people are credible and see situations where we will say people are not credible. And if you are interested in learning more about the credibility of a midwife, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf, as we'll pick up from Tana Rabbanan tomorrow. And God willing, I will look at the question of why the Gemara needed to say that the halacha was like Rabbi Yossi. Yeah, have a great day. And again, tefillah that all of the soldiers in Israel stay safe and that the hostages come back safely and free.
Man.